Hi, Carl. It's so nice to have you back on the podcast. We usually talk about your writing because you're such a prolific author, but today we're here to talk about your music and your music career because so much is going on.
That's right, and thank you for having me. I think that when you're a productive person, which I am, you simply cannot work with all of these expressions at the same time. As you know, and I think most people know, I've been working with writing, publishing, making films, making music, doing a lot of photography. And unfortunately, I wish I was this sort of Indian god figure with eight different hands and three brains. But it doesn't work like that. So this past period, I've been working very much with writing, getting some of my books out, and also with the publishing. But at the same time, I felt this sort of burgeoning or increasing desire to work with the musical archive mainly. And I think in part it had to do with it has to do with two important demises, unfortunately. One being Genesis Peorage, who died in 2020, and then my great musical partner Thomas Tibert, who died last year in 2022. That of course affects you on not only on like friendship levels, but also you look back and process what it is that you've created together. And in some senses, music is such an incredible artistic medium, or artistic expression toolbox, because it's not really an intellectual construct. It affects you on emotional levels. It affects you on irrational levels. And so when you make these things together with another person, and I've had a few great musical collaborations in that sense, it's very intimate. It's you've created something that is basically only on the emotional sphere. Like when I listen to old tracks, old music that I've been involved with Thomas, with Jayne, with Peter Bergstrand from White Stains, and all these things. It's so evocative. It takes me back to the moment of making the music, the life period that was going on at the time, and of course the dissemination through concerts or records. It's basically like a huge cluster or accumulation of emotional memories, thereby being, very, 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 very magical. So what I've done now, basically these past months, is actively going through the musical archive and seeing what should be out there. And from my perspective, I think everything should be out there, and offering it to labels who perhaps want to produce some kind of physical, tangible edition on vinyl or CD or cassette. And that happened very quickly. Like with this one, it's the first CD in that sense. It's White Stains' Single-Minded Dualisms. And I think it's a great example of what's going on. It's something that I put together, all of the White Stains singles, vinyl singles, from 1988 and 1989. And that I put together as a digital release, available through all the biggies, Spotify, Apple Music, etc., a couple of years ago. And now it's out in a physical, tangible form. And an interesting, well, it's not a coincidence, but it's an unconscious movement of creativity, was that just yesterday I released a so-called new release on in the digital sphere, called Dark Sexorcism, with Cotton Ferox, which was the main project I had with Thomas Tibert. And is relating to Single-Minded Dualisms, in the sense that a long time ago, in 2007, we played the White Stains singles backwards in the studio and put that together. And then we added new Cotton Ferox like soundscapes on top, plus we wove in voices from interviews I had made with specific people, because it was a soundtrack for an exhibition called Olika människor, or different people. So it's constantly amorphous in a way. The material has a life of its own and wants to be heard, and then takes on different kinds of shapes, constellations, release forms, structures. And that makes it very interesting to work with, because you could argue that I am the filter, or I am the accumulator, or creator in a way, co-creator in many of these cases. But it's really driven by the material itself. It's very hard to explain, but it's like you invest things in a musical structure that in theory has been vibrating ever since we played it the first time, through a normal amplifier or a live amplifier or in a studio. You play the music you've composed and produced, and it does take on a life of its own. And I think that's true for most art forms, most expressions. They leave something behind in the partaker, but also in the creator, and sometimes in the interaction between partaker and creator. So that's the process that I'm in the midst of right now, and it's a joy, of course, because there are a lot of things that were at one time released on solid, albums and stuff like that, that now need to be out again. But there's also a lot of unreleased stuff. You could call it pent up, perhaps, pent up musical projects that need to be exercised in a way, and set free, unleashed, so that people can either listen casually and connect the dots between what was going on between different collaborators, different phases, or simply groove with one specific track or album, or they can perform rituals to it. It's not my business. I just want the music to be out there, and it is conducive to all of these things: casual listening, being a nerd, collecting records, using it for ritual, and many, many more things. So I would say being involved in this sort of hard drive detective work is a great pleasure.
Yeah, 'cause I know that's one of the things Joachim put out before on Ideal Recordings was the workings, because it's such a great piece of ritual music.
Yeah, absolutely. Workings, that was not even a musical project. It was stuff that me and Thomas Tibert made together specifically for ritual use. It was supposed to be played on cassette in the background of whenever you were doing some kind of weird hocus pocus, and it worked really well. I had enough experience at that time to know what triggered me in the moment. It couldn't be too eventful, it couldn't be too dynamic or chaotic. It needed to be like a pulse, definitely a rhythm, something dark and evocative, that helped build an atmosphere in the ritual chamber. And then, of course, we released those two cassettes via Topiscan, via the Temple of Psychic Youth. And, I guess it sold a few copies, not too many, but they were bought by people who used this music for the very same purpose, meaning it was not for casual listening. It could be used for that, but that was really active music for magical people. And then, of course, when it much later comes out, and Joachim produced this beautiful box with cassettes in, and then it becomes a work of art. And there you have this sort of beautiful interaction and intersection that we love so much, where it becomes more than one thing. It becomes more than ritual music, and it certainly becomes more than a work of art. It's these two things and many more things conjoined to create quite a powerful talismanic object that can also be used. So it's seems to be a more or less endless process, where again these musical compositions are more than what they seem to be. They do have a life of their own. They want to be heard. They want to be seen in a way. They want to be acknowledged for what they are. And so far, it's very interesting, because the more I set them free, the more things happen, meaning that they are inherently magical. And it's also thematically inherently more magical, in the sense that the more music you put out there, whether it's newly composed or old archival stuff, it creates more music, also in music in between human beings, where we talk about music, where we listen to music, where we create new music together, you know. So it's I guess it's very primordial language that certainly goes hand in hand with any and all magical and magical anthropological theories that I have and that I care for and that I work with and that I write about also. This thing where we do have a source, that's where the source magic comes from. And part of that is definitely the irrational, strictly emotional, evocative language of music, meaning basically vibration and rhythm.
Maybe you could walk us through your musical career from the beginning for people who aren't sure or who only know one project or another, but don't know how many different kind of projects and iterations and different people you've worked with throughout the years.
Absolutely. I think that when you're young, you are like a sponge. You want to basically try things out, and it ends up with you emulating, because you're not schooled yet. You haven't started your own process of learning. So you begin by emulation, which is wonderful. That's what kids do too. They emulate their parents and their behavior in order basically to survive. And in my case, I was listening to, well, maybe two main kinds of music. One was rock and roll, sort of tough, and like Iggy and the Stooges, and there was a lot of things going on at that time, meaning late 70s, early 80s, with post-punk specifically, the um, weirder kinds of rock and roll from the US that then merged with stuff from the UK, as always happens. So that kind of rock and roll thing, and also psychedelic rock from the 60s, I loved a lot. But then there was also the more experimental or highbrow music, in a tradition of experimental music from, you know, the 30s and onwards. I liked a lot, and classical music that was sort of evocative. But specifically, there were interesting intersections going on at this time, meaning again late 70s, early 80s. And I'm thinking, of course, of the industrial music with Robin Griswold that then morphed into psychic TV and created this entire scene where music could be not only artistic and emotional, it could also be intellectual, it could also be magical, specifically expressively magical. And I got really hooked on that. I found it extremely inspiring and incentivizing. So of course I had those two things, you know. So when it was time to form a band, which was White Stains, in 1987, I was 21 at the time. We started out as a kind of very noisy semi-psychedelic rock band, but there was always this very noisy aspect, and parallel I recorded music of just chaos, you know, improvised things that are quite powerful, because there was a lot of emotional investment in those musical recording sessions. So already then I had these two things, you know, with structured and sort of traditional in a way, but far out. And then I had the really far out and sort of experimental things going on. And it reflected also in White Stains, depending on who I worked with. So you could say that the first phase, 1987, 1988, was very much a rock and roll phase, psychedelic rock and roll phase. And that's the kind of stuff that people can listen to at the Singleminded Dualism project in the CD, and also available online, of course. But then when I started working together with Peter Bergstrand and Thomas Seibert, Thomas had a studio of his own. He was a very good studio technician. He liked sounds. And Peter was a great musician. He was a professional bass player. I played with many bands that I liked. So that opened up doors into more structured, again, but also weird stuff, just on a slightly higher level. Left the psychedelic rock and roll, became slightly more contemporary, and specifically drifted with these two people, Thomas and Peter, into two different kinds of electronic ambient music. You could argue same but different, but to me they're very different because they are what you and I call third mind projects, me third minding with Thomas, me third minding with Peter. The three of us didn't always get along as a trio, and that's the reason why we had this sort of, not a split, but a divergence in a way of creative collaborations. And it turned into some beautiful, beautiful records, music, like Misanthropo Tantra and Why Not Forever with Peter, and The Somewhat Lost Horizon with Thomas, which is great ambient electronic music. And then after 1994, White Saints basically took a hibernation break, because we had worked so hard but not really gotten anywhere with record sales or touring in Europe. It led nowhere really. You know, a lot of fun experiences, but not. I had some kind of vain ambition of making it into something slightly more substantial, financially or creatively. I don't know. So then I couldn't keep my fingers out of the cookie jar, so I kept doing music of my own. Solo projects, solo recordings. Some saw the light of day, some didn't. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm sort of exploring now in the archives. And then around 2000, the year 2000, I reconvened with Thomas to create Cotton Ferox, which was a brand new project. And we made some great music, great records. We played a lot live, and also we collaborated, like both with White Stains. Me and Thomas collaborated with Genesis. Also in Cotton Ferox, we collaborated with Genesis. It was like a tradition, sort of, with 14 years in between, in a way, or 12, whatever it was. We just, with Cotton Ferox, it was very much going out on a limb. Some of the stuff was structured, but it was always very, very trippy, and it was what you call like spoken word. Whereas previously it had been very much instrumental music without words. In Cotton Ferox, it was very much spoken word with a magical agenda, if you will. I invested the words very much with intention, and sort of performed it with intention, whether in the studio or live. And it worked really well as a magical method, and it's still something that I'm exploring in making new music and new spoken word projects. And then I guess from during the 2010s, everything sort of fizzled out in a way. You could call it creative differences, or just different trajectories in life, that kind of stuff. So we sort of drifted away from each other, and I started working even more on my own, because I felt that the third mind that we had didn't really bring so much. So I made my own stuff, and then when you and I got together, you and I started working together musically and in project wise, and it was great to be back in that kind of third mind saddle. And that's basically it. So it's been White Stains, which technically still exists. I'm thinking of making some new White Stains records, because it's fun to have that kind of long-term project. Cotton Ferox is asleep. There's a lot of unfinished, unreleased stuff by Cotton Ferox. I think possibly 2-3 albums that I just have to wrap up, basically, that Thomas and I worked on over many years, but never came to that final fruition. So in a sense, Cotton Ferox exists, but Thomas is gone. So it's not a third mind. It's me taking care of the archive and legacy, basically. And that's where I am right now, working with the old stuff, but that sort of inspires me to work on new stuff also.
And you also mentioned working with Genesis in each of these projects. You had the White Stains and Psychic TV at Stockholm, and you had Cotton Ferox and The Majesty Wordship, and then you had Carl Abrahamsson and Genesis Briar Pure Ridge as the final projects. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Absolutely. The first one at Stockholm was at the height of good Topi times, and there were a lot of creative projects, and one of them being to bring Genesis and Paula Peorage over to Scandinavia for a spoken word mini tour. And for that, me and Thomas prepared some music, and also a beautiful person called Per Aronsson helped us with that. And it was great music, and worked really well live. And so we had sort of more or less decided beforehand, before the tour even began, that let's record this properly when we come to Stockholm. And so we did. And we had the music, we sort of played the music. It's not exactly the way it turned out to be on the record, but it was the same pieces of music that Jen read to, and Paula mixed her tapes and samples live. And it was a beautiful, magical experience, in part also for me to, because I'd admired Jen for already 10 years or something, to actually work creatively in that sense, not merely as in the network sense or in the ritual sense, but to actually make something creative in this sense. And he was so professional, everything was so prepared, and that's beautiful, seductive voice, just delivering everything is like first takes. It was, maybe one little retake, but it was so professional. And that also helps by making it magical in a way. It was meant to be magical, and that's why it turned out to be magical. That album came out in 1990 and is, I think, generally regarded as a kind of masterpiece. I think so, many others do. Both from White Saints' perspective, but also from the delivery of Jan and Paula. Then it took 14 years before the next CD came out, the Wordship CD, which was with The Majesty, which was Jen's solo project or studio project, and Cotton Ferox, which was me and Thomas at the time. We recorded it in Stockholm in 2002, and it came out in 2004 on CD. And it was the same thing there. Beautiful poetry, great delivery, very professional, moved together, and it became this beautiful album. And then I said to Jen much later, probably around 2015, 16, something like that, shouldn't we make a third one? Because that would make a little trio or trilogy, which would be great. And we did, and recorded that, and that came out in 2018, maybe 19. So that's another 14 years down the line, and we only used our names for that, Carl Abrahamsson and Genesis Bry Priorage. And that's the album is called Loyalty Does Not End with Death. The vocals were recorded in New York, in Sean Ragon's studio, and then I made the music in Stockholm and produced it in Stockholm. So that's also kind of an incredible long-term piece of work, because I see them all as one piece in a way. The first two were made together with Thomas also, and then the final one wasn't. In a similar way that our book Sacred Intent is a long-term project. Sacred Intent is a book that collects the conversations or interviews that I did with Jen from 1986 up until 2019. And even if you, with the best of intentions, you can never go back and redo that. So there was this kind of thing of having some regular stops in the flow forwards to actually have a third mind session and see, what should we do? Well, let's make another record, let's make another interview, let's make another film, and just to see and document in a way what was going on at the time, but also as a little midpoint or pit stop in this great race forwards. So I'm very happy about that. Sort of, I love that kind of long-term perspective. I don't think many people have it. They want to be like in the moment. And of course, when you look back at that moment later on, you do have a historical perspective. But if you construct it with specifically a long-term thing in mind, it has a different dynamic, which I think is more interesting in many ways. You invest in the future by deciding that, many moons from now we'll make something else. It becomes part of almost like a magical being that has a life and just waits for the next infusion.
Yeah, and those things become very precious to see how ideas evolve over time, like with Sacred Intent, or to see how music and collaborations evolve over time with these other projects.
Yeah, for me, it's pure history writing, because what people tend to call history writing is for me more like history editing. They're editing sources and putting it together. Sometimes it's objective, sometimes it's not, but the actual history writing is the real original writing. That because two historians can put these same source material together in different ways. So the real history writing is the actual moment of creation, and the documentation of whatever happened there. Whereas history editing is something else. That's the thing that you can buy in the bookstore when someone has put it together, usually with a subjective, through a subjective grid or filter. But I've always been more interested in just doing it and keeping it under the umbrella of art in that sense. You could say that Sacred Intent is an anthology of, almost from a journalistic perspective, but it's also art in the sense that we decided around, again, I think in the late 90s, that we should really make a book of this someday, because we'd already made so many interviews, and thereby we decided that it's no longer a later anthology of interviews, it's a project. Thereby it's an art project, because we were both creative people. And it's also a magical project because we were both magicians. So again, you have this intersection and sort of, I won't say conflation, but I mean, it's sometimes hard to say exactly what it is, because it is many things. And that's when I find it interesting to work with.
Yeah, and I love the idea of these things as magical projects as well. And I think the story, for those who don't know it, maybe you could talk about your very first record, and Jen encouraging to send it to LeVay and everything that happened from that moment, because I think that's such a great inspirational story for especially young people. Just get your stuff out there and send it to people you admire, send it to people you want to hear it, no matter what you think, if they'll respond or not, because you never know what might happen. And a lot of times
Absolutely.
magical people, especially, I found, are very open and want to help other people coming up to like get their magic and their artwork out there too. Most people are really encouraging in my experience.
Yeah, totally. In this very first phase, we're now back in 1987, 1988, with the first lineup of White Stains, that band. I usually wrote about things that were relevant to me, which was, magical theory, magical practice, cool people, trying to make it all into, usable lyrics for these rock and roll songs. And one of the things that I was very much into was this sort of pop culture, B movies, horror films, what's generally called like trash culture. I was a huge fan of that, and I still am. And the other infusion was basically occultism, great magicians, occult history, the history of magic, seeing what's going on today, etc., etc. And there was an interesting meeting there, or confluence, in the sense that one of my preferred or most cherished American B actresses, Jayne Mansfield, had been a friend with Anton LaVey, who was someone I really admired. I loved what the Church of Satan had been doing and were doing, and so basically these were two little, not rivulets, but there were two rivers floating and together merging into a great big ocean of fun. And I wrote a song about that called Sweet Jane, about the relationship, and it was just my own teenage fantasies in a way. And when that became the first record of White Stains, it's like a 12-inch single called White Stains, incidentally also featured on the Singleminded Dualisms CD. And when that came out, Genesis said that, I recently met LaVey in San Francisco. You should send the record to him. I think he would appreciate it. And for me, it was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I'll do that. And Jen gave me the address, and I just sent it, not expecting anything, But I did get a very, very friendly letter back, not only acknowledging receipt, but being very happy about the project, saying Jayne would be happy, and also making me a member of the Church of Satan. So that was kind of a super mind blower. And that, of course, as most people who know my work, has been with me all of my life, and I mean, in certain senses, it still is. And specifically, perhaps when I in I don't know, it came back to haunt me in a way in the mid-teens, sort of around 2015. A guy got in touch, a Swedish guy who had a big collection that he wanted to show me, and it turned out to be the photographers and his photographs of Jayne Mansfield and LaVey together. He had been a paparazzo photographer in Los Angeles and had taken pictures of them at many times. And for me, seeing these pictures, they were the pictures I'd seen in the Swedish men's magazines in the early 80s that had created my love for these two specific people. And now I saw the real photographs and immediately said that, wow, we need to turn this into a book. And that became the book California Infernal by Walter Fisher, a great photographer. So that was like the first thing that reawoke this wonderful foundation of my youth, in a way, my prurient crystallization, what was going on between Jayne Mansfield and Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. Just remarkable. And the book turned out to be a beautiful photo book. It did well. I think it's sold out now. And anyway, that got me thinking about, because what had happened after I'd sent the record to LaVey and gotten the letter was that I went over there. I went over to San Francisco in 1989, and then almost once a year for the following years. And we became friends. And Anton LaVey and Blanche Barton, his partner, they were incredibly supportive of my work. Providing me with material for the Fenris Wolf Journal, and just on a personal level, encouraging my writing, all of these things that have meant a lot to me. And this came about because Jen said, send the record to LaVey. You never know what happens. And some great things happened, and they are still with me, very resonant today. And of course, zooming back beyond the coffee table book, California Infernal, I started thinking about, whoa, what was really going on at the time when I was there, And I started talking to some other people who had been there at the same time. And that turned into the quite ambitious documentary film, Into the Devil's Den, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, that then led on to the book, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, Infernal Wisdom from the Devil's Den. So it's like this first amorous teenage infection, in a way, or affliction even, that turned into this song, created many major ripple effects in my life. So you just have to trust the river, in a way.
Yeah, and go where your passion and desire direct you.
Exactly.
Totally. And like you said, you have the film, the books, the Fenris Wolf series is still going, and of course all this great music is coming out. And you mentioned that it's available digitally, and that's it. You've been putting everything up on Bandcamp slowly but surely, and quickly but surely, I should say, getting it up on Bandcamp. And we've been revitalizing the Highbrow Lowlife website. Maybe you could talk a little bit about Highbrow Lowlife, your record label.
Absolutely. It began also as a kind of a collaboration with Thomas. We had a label called Confucius and a greater project called Kooks, together with other independent labels in the early 2000s. But that sort of fizzled out too. And then we still needed a label to release records, because we were producing albums and we wanted to retain that kind of control. So we created Highbrow Lowlife, which was a record label and still is. Today it's you and me running it. And I think we're up to, in theory at least, almost 70 releases. And I'm going to make sure that they're all available digitally online, and also just keep releasing stuff. So the Highbrow Lowlife project as such is part of this foundational period, which was the early 80s, I'd say, for me, when there were a lot of independent labels around You didn't want to, as it was, sell out to a major, whatever that meant. But you retain your own control. And of course, back then it was all physical, tangible vinyls, later on CDs, cassettes. And now it's all basically online with streaming and downloading, which is beautiful, and a slight resurgence of vinyl and CDs and even cassettes. And I think it's all great. I would love for everything to be available on every platform in every medium in a way. So I will not take highbrow lowlife tangible physical. It's too much work, and I have the similar kind of dilemma with the book publishing at Trapar. Books, films, and editions. So I think Highbrow Lowlife will be mainly a digital platform, and we're doing good. And the site is being revamped as we speak, and it will be a great hub for people, just like the Highbrow Lowlife Bandcamp, where people can buy a lot of the releases, and that sort of goes straight to us, whereas it's a slower process. And you don't get money from Spotify plays, for instance, but it's still good to be there, just the exposure, so that people can find our music in the environment that they're accustomed to, that they like, simply. And I guess Spotify has taken over a lot of that, but we of course appreciate if people buy and download the albums via the Bandcamp, Highbrow Lowlife Bandcamp, and all of the links there will be at the or they are at the Highbrow Lowlife website, which is basically highbrow-lowlife.com. So it's fun to work with. It's one of these never-ending projects that you occasionally get tired of it, but then you have to sort of resume, because it is a way of it's a house in a way, and the house has many rooms, and it's a beautiful house. And if you're tired of it, you just leave the house for a while and go to another house. But then you return and realize, whoa, it's a little bit dusty here in the corner. So you start cleaning up, and you maybe redo the interior decoration, whatever. But it's still the same. It's still a house of music.
Well, and it's great that you're doing this now and taking care of your archives, because you're doing that in a lot of ways, like with that book that you recently just finished writing, where it's like your magical autobiography of sorts, and you've been going through all the archives and pulling out this material and organizing it and finding so many gems. And it's important to keep it all organized, because this is like cultural history.
Yeah, totally. And I was going to say that I've always been a pack rat, but I don't mean that. I think I've always been an amateur archivist, collecting stuff, but not really knowing how to structure it in a hyper-rational way. What's been interesting at the moment for creative purposes is right before me, and then it gets sort of not tossed out, but it has a kind of an intuitive order. And sometimes I find that I've created much more order than I think or remember, but usually it's kind of semi-chaotic, and then I have to make a little bit of structure there, and then I find a lot of gems. And writing that magical biography that's coming out early next year was an amazing experience, because a little bit frustrating too. I found such a lot of good stuff that has been integrated on some level, but of course I couldn't fit everything in. But that's not frustrating. That's just an incentive to write another book on a similar vibe, or perhaps focus on one specific era or collaboration, whatever, and just see where that takes me, because there's simply so much stuff in the archive, just like there is with the musical archive.
And I want to make sure everyone knows where they can find all of your stuff. So you have your main website, carlabrahamsson.com, and that seems to have links to most everything else.
Yeah.
And then you've got, of course, your publishing company, Trapar Books, Films, and Editions. So you can go to trapar.net for that. And then you've got all of your films, as well as video lectures you've been doing. You've been recording a lot of video lectures on your Vimeo on demand.
That's right.
And
also the Patreon that you and I have together is a great source for exclusive material and just quick news updates and
works in progress,
and the Magic
Monday
post. Yeah, the Magic Monday post is like once a week. You and I write about our magical practice, and it's turning into, once a year we turn them into books. 2 volumes out so far. So I mean, that's for me also a good example of how it works. On a daily level, we work with this kind of creative magic or magical creativity, and it turns into product. And as Jen would say, the product is the process, and vice versa. Further down the line, it turns into a book, or it turns into a record, and then it creates synergies and sort of cross fertilizes. I love this kind of. It's like being constantly inside a womb that doesn't create humanoid little monsters, but just great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, all the different projects feed each other. Big books become films, and music becomes soundtracks, and vice versa. Films
Yeah,
become books, and it just goes round and round.
yeah,
Lyrics for songs become poetry books, and yeah, it's endless.
yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the music, we should also mention that the Bandcamp site, I think. I mean, of course, people will find that through my website, through your website, and through the Highbrow Lowlife website. There will be links to the Bandcamp, but it's basically Bandcamp, yeah, highbrowlowlife.bandcamp.com, and that's where we now put everything as much as possible. Eventually, there will be everything, of course, old stuff, new stuff, readily available with information notes and all kinds of stuff. It's really like it's a good repository for everything that I've been involved with. Sooner or later, everything will be there.
Yeah, and the best thing to do is to buy things there on Bandcamp Friday, which there's a Bandcamp Friday this
Yeah,
Friday, August 4th, and they have them periodically. I don't know if they're exactly every month, but periodically there's a Bandcamp Friday. So we'll keep people posted as to when those are coming up through our Patreon and social
yeah.
media, because then all of the money goes directly to the artists, which is very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a physical release, like we do have some DIY CDs for some releases or things like that, we try to link that from the Bandcamp as well. So if you're interested in the physical release, and then you've also got this new poster coming out soon too. That's a old gem of a poster that's going to be available soon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the original poster that I have a few of from the release of at Stockholm. When the CD came out in 1990. It's a beautiful poster, and that's something that we will be selling via Bandcamp.
Great. Is there anything else that you want to mention that we didn't get to?
Well, probably, but it never ends. That's the I was gonna say that's the problem, but it's not a problem. It's a blessing. It never ends. It's a blessing, and there will be more music, more movies, more books, more lectures, more of everything. It's just the way it is, and I think I would like to thank everyone who's supporting us also through the Patreon, through buying stuff from Bandcamp or from Trapar. Every little contribution makes a great deal of difference, and it's makes it possible to carry on at this frantic pace because it basically buys us time to work with stuff that we really love and that really inspires us. And I think it's good because if nothing else, hopefully that will inspire other people to do their own thing also. That's always been a key thing for me, and that's as far as I go in terms of proselytizing any kind of philosophy. It's just really do your own thing, go with the flow, individuate, find out what makes you happy, and then just do it. It's very hard, but it's also that simple.
Yeah, no, and you're a great example of that. And I love you were recently on Devin Person's uh podcast. This podcast is a ritual, and I really like that he caught that angle. There's, if somebody's not putting this information out and organizing it into books and lectures and organizing events, then the information doesn't get to people. And you've been doing that for decades for people. So it was
Yeah,
really nice to hear and recognize that, because I see that and you see that, and this is all independent work done from passion and love. You've had your own publishing company independently, since the 80s and in different forms. And this is, of course, independent music labels, and it's important to support independent artists. He also said something that I thought was really smart. You mentioned like selling out, like it used to be like, do your own thing, don't sell out, and keep your integrity. But now with social media, it's like all about selling out, like all about what you can get some advertiser to get you to sell
Yeah,
on Instagram or whatever. And we don't do that. And you can see the market, trying to get you to do that. And but then it changes what you're doing, and what's more important. I mean, it's important to also make money and have a living, but it's, we need that too. But it's also important to keep doing what you're doing with your own vision and integrity, and not just like, yeah, sell random products because they're offering you money.
absolutely. No, I mean, it's very, very, very interesting. I think the greatest aspect of influencing for me has always been and remains, and will hopefully always be, just inspiration. I want to influence people to be inspired and do their own thing, because it's a weird, very zeitgeistish expression or profession, to be an influencer. It could be good, could be bad, it really means nothing. But usually it has to do with you subjugating whatever it is you want to do to outer forces that will be visible in your glow, in the light of your aura, in a way. And for me, it has to be something very, 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 very special for me to allow that. So I'm very happy and grateful for people who actually support what we do by buying our stuff. That's always the best thing. And the Patreon, of course, is wonderful. So because every little counts, and
Yeah, it all adds up. No, and the influencers, I mean, they're basically just getting people to buy stuff, They're
yeah,
just,
well, so are we, but we wanted to buy our stuff, not
yeah, yeah,
others.
exactly. But we're not taking money from outside people to
Yeah,
talk people into buying their products.
yeah,
We're just doing what we love and hoping people love it and want to support us in
yeah,
that too.
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
and like you said, not telling people what they should do or what they should think, but rather just trying to show them through example that you can like live a great life doing what you really care about and what really drives you, and they should
Mhm.
find whatever that is in themselves and do that too,
Yeah,
not telling them what that is for them, which is
yeah,
also a big difference because people a lot of times want a guru or want somebody to tell them what to do. And as a psychoanalyst, I don't do that. As a magician, you don't do that. We don't do that. We don't tell
no,
people what to do. We might point them to great things, like people have pointed us to great things. Like you mentioned the Topi days, you'd have liner notes, or in LeVay's Satanic Bible, you have notes about what authors they like or music they like, and it sends you on these journeys into these other worlds of like authors and writers and thinkers and musicians that you didn't know about before.
mhm.
And that we love to do, like show people great things that have inspired us, but it's not telling them what they should be thinking or doing. It's just showing them more
Yeah,
creative, yeah,
yeah.
fountains
It's
of
basically about
inspiration.
being generous with your own process. It's not just putting product out there, but also be willing to talk about it and explain things for those who want to listen. You shouldn't explain things to people who don't want to listen. You should only explain things when people ask you to explain them. And I think that's also something that is symptomatic of the times we live in. There's simply too much explanation and too little emotion. And there's no way we can change that other than do what we do. Just be true to yourself and keep producing stuff that is resonant with the core that you have. And I think we're doing that. And I think can also see that for me, when I was young, I thought, oh, it's going to be so horrible, to be old. I wouldn't say that I'm old, but I'm definitely older. And it's only brought great things in the sense that I've stuck to my vision, whatever it is that I'm doing. Decidedly, the advantages of getting older is that you become more and more recognized. And it's not an automatic process. You still have to work, but I've been working diligently since the early 80s. And so I guess people know who I am. There's this thing called brand recognition. And in that sense, it is good to stay not the same, but to stay on the same path and, produce new stuff, of course, to develop and allow for new energies to come in, new third mind projects, but basically that you're continuing to be true to yourself. And I perceive that I am, and I perceive that has great effects and benefits in the sense of spreading inspiration, but also from a strictly causal perspective. You know, the more books I write, the more books are published, and the more people will see them. So it is a kind of it's a causal process too that I greatly enjoy working in, I have to say.
Yeah, and we should also let people know you have started consulting as well, where you meet with people and kind of help coach them and teach them things that you've learned along the way. And maybe you could say a little bit about that, that's available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's part of every magical tradition, and I am part of a magical tradition that is fairly unique and fairly 20th century, but it still has deep roots within this beautiful, as I call it, colorful gray area where art and culture and magic meet, specifically how Topi, for instance, integrated the writings of Burroughs and Gysin, and basically artistic influx that was magically tainted or infused, but merged with this specifically magical energy of Topi and created something that is new and vital. And that's the kind of perspective I have. I'm not dusty or arcane. I'm not rooted in a grimoire tradition. More so, I would say I'm more rooted in cutting edge psychology in a way. And I like to talk to people, and I can inspire people, and I have helped a lot of people on a one-to-one basis also. Of course, everything in complete confidence and secrecy and respect. When people are really stuck, and usually it is magicians. It is magicians who have had these conundrums of, could be generational shifts or not feeling that they get the results they want, or it could be even, non-magical people who just want to have a little boost by conversation, or by these things that I call existential technology, which is basically magical artworks or talismanic artworks that I can create for people, and it really helps. It has helped a lot of people, and I welcome those meetings and consultations very
Yeah,
much.
exactly. You can help teach people how to do it themselves and coach
Yeah.
them, or people can also hire you to create magical artworks and do sigil work
Yep.
for them as
Yep.
as a
Exactly.
magician.
Exactly.
And I think that the Patreon meeting that we had about a month ago was also really generative. We invited our Patreon community to chat with us for an hour and a half or so. And that's led to some magical art, collaborative artworks as well. So we'll probably do more of that. So join our Patreon community for more of that.
Hmm.
And yeah. Is there anything else? We're doing so much.
Yeah, we're
People
doing a
always
lot.
tell us that we're doing so much, and now that we're talking, I'm like, wow, we really are doing so much. Oh, we also
Yeah.
have a class coming up. We should talk about that too, where
Yeah.
we're having a class through morbid anatomy the first 4 Sundays, starting September 10th. We're going to do 4 2-hour classes for those 4 Sundays on the cut up method and using it as a magical and creative practice and infusing it with an intention to help create things in your life and manifest things in your life. So that'll be 4 weeks of that, and there's already a good amount of people signed up for that, so we welcome people to sign that as well. You can find that at morbidanatomy.org. And I'll link to it, of course, in the liner notes. I'll link to everything in the liner notes that accompany this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I have anything specific to add. It's just it's a daily grind, but it's a beautiful grind, and it leads to many new processes and products and meetings and consultations and third mindings, and it's just delightful.
A delightful bouquet, as my
Yeah.
husband would say.
Hmm.
Yeah, and we'll do more of these and have you back, and we can keep talking about your process and our processes, because I think, yeah, it's a great thing to do. And actually, by talking through it, it's helping me kind of organize things in my mind. So, for
That's how
purely
it works.
selfish reasons, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
keep third minding
Yep.
on the podcast for everybody to hear, and hopefully it inspires others. And reach out if you have any questions. We're also going to do that. We're going to try to add some more interactive aspects to our Patreon. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to email me. You can find my email at my contact page, drvanessasinclair.net/contact. And my email is vs@drvanessasinclair.net. Email me any questions you have for us, because we're going to start answering them on our Patreon, doing something live like this where we chat and answer questions. So yeah, feel free to send those in as well. And then I always put a song at the end of the episodes. Did you have a specific song you'd like to highlight?
Wow, that's difficult. I think you should highlight by playing at least a little snippet from Sweet Jayne.
Okay, no, we're gonna
Because
play
it
the
is.
whole Sweet Jayne then,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We
since
can do that
that's the
because it
song
is
that
on this.
started it all.
It didn't start it all, but it started a major movement in my life that led to so many things, and to us actually sitting here today in the way that we're doing. Everything has its origin, everything has its core. Pardon the pun, genesis, where it sprouts. When the seed has matured enough, it comes to the surface and pierces the veil of the surface, and then becomes a beautiful flower or a tree or a shrub or whatever it becomes. And I think that song, Sweet Jayne, is one of those moments, one of those piercing moments when I left the dark occult soil and became something cultural.
Yeah, and we could use the artwork for the cover art for this episode, because I love the artwork for that
It's a cutout
12-inch
collage.
single as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Great. And I just
All
have to
right.
show you our beautiful puppy. She's been sleeping here like a little angel. Hello. Isn't she so cute? What a good dog.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linnea.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I love you, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
See you downstairs.
Bye.
Bye.